y'all for tuning in. First bill on the agenda is Senate Bill number 2822, and I'll recognize Senator Parker to explain the bill. And before he does that, I'd like to ask, we are short-staffed, so if you would please leave your bills here for the next committee meeting so we don't have to go and reprint a bunch of more bills, if you don't mind. And then if you want to keep a copy, come back after the meeting. Senator Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members, for being here. I want to kind of just open by saying that for the past 2 years, you've heard me make mention of Inflex, and in bills I presented and other things I brought up on the floor, I've kind of mentioned the situation we've had, and incentives in the state has been very challenging because the incentives are hard to understand. They kind of overlap each other. Some of them are used, some of them are not used. And so what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to bring our state forward and put us ahead of other states instead of being behind. So I'm going to go ahead and open by just saying with Inflex, right now, our state has dozens of tax incentives, most of which are very complicated, and they don't really assist our economic developers. Inflex is designed in concert, or we're working with our economic developers to be a very capable professional plan so that we can attract new businesses and expand businesses that exist already in our state. It's designed to remedy many of the downsides of our current incentives by streamlining incentives in the state in one easy-to-use calculation that's based largely on investments, jobs, and wages and benefits. It's making this one flexible incentive competitive as compared to other states in order to attract business. And as I mentioned earlier, it's increasing transparency so that the public and economic developers understand whether the incentive is useful and is fulfilling its intended purpose. Let me stress, Inflex is performance-based. It's not promise-based. The business provides their assumptions of what they will produce in terms of investment, jobs, and wages, but they only receive a credit based on what they actually produce. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the bill. I've got a handout for you too. I'm going to try to reference the handout as I walk you through the bill. I'm going to do kind of a Joey Fillingane, Senator Fillingane kind of explanation and kind of going through so that you know everything we're talking about here. So again, I'll start in Section 1 of the bill. It just names this the Mississippi Flexible Tax Incentive Act. Section 2 of the bill goes into the definitions. There's several definitions. I'm going to highlight just a few of these. In subsection little h, we define a base full-time job as someone who's working 1,820 hours per year. That is 35 hours per week. And it also defines within a full-time job that part-time jobs cannot be combined to add up to become a base full-time job. There's some additional definitions, but jumping down to little section O, the minimum job creation to be able to apply for this Inflex incentive is going to be creating at least 10 new full-time jobs. In little section P, the minimum qualified investment will be $2.5 million to apply. A new full-time job, if you're applying for this, will be the same as what an existing base full-time job is, which is the same 1,820 hours per year or 35 hours per week on a continuing basis. And again, there's some other definitions there. Jumping down to definition X for a qualified project. I'm going to highlight this in your handout on the second page here. A qualified or an approved project, if you see the Inflex eligibility sheet right there, is going to include certain businesses. I'm on this one right here that has the orange for those of you who are following along here. It will include a manufacturing or remanufacturing, assembly, processing, or refining enterprise, or an expansion of one of those, a warehouse or distribution enterprise or an expansion, a research and development enterprise or expansion, regional or national headquarters enterprise or an expansion, air transportation or maintenance enterprise or expansion, data information processing enterprise or an expansion, a technology intensive enterprise or expansion of such, a telecommunications enterprise or an expansion, and a data center enterprise or an expansion. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is that this pretty much across the state, it touches every single one of us. Some of us are representing areas of the state that are, and I don't think we put on here, it's not on here, but I also have in there a new ship or vessel transportation or repair center or expansion. So the point I want to make here is that there's no part of the state that's not going to have an opportunity with the type of business and industry that they tend to kind of attract to take advantage of Inflex here. As we move along a little bit further in the bill, I'm going to go to Section 3, which is the application for the Inflex incentive. It's going to include detailed information to include the business overview, a location, a description, the investment proposed, the expansion, the current number of jobs the company has, the number of new full-time jobs proposed to be created, the average employer wage proposed. And again, in Section 3, I'm going through each letter, so subsection H, there are benefits, including health, dental, vision, retirement, time to create the positions, the affiliates of the industry, and an acknowledgement that the applicant is to report as required. Again, as I go through this more and more, transparency is going to be something that's key to this, and reporting is something that we feel is going to be a great part of what we're trying to offer here. Moving to Section 4, certification and award of the incentive. MDA in number 1 under Section 4 shall evaluate and decide if a business or industry is to receive the Inflex incentive. In Section 2 there, upon approval, MDA will certify the project as a qualified economic development project and award the incentive, and they will impose mandatory conditions upon the incentive. In Section 3 there, upon issuance of the Inflex agreement, the business may apply the incentive as a credit to offset items such as in line 454, any state taxes except defined withholding taxes, which in subsection B there, only 20% of an offset toward withholding taxes will be allowed each year. Under subsection 4 of Section 4, the conditions are that the award is not transferable. The business must be in compliance with all laws to receive. The business agreement with MDA must include provisions of Section 3 that we mentioned, the overview questions, and the terms for recapture if the business fails to comply, or in more human terms here, the clawback provisions for failure to comply. And we're all aware of situations where the state has made allowances for a business to come here, and quite frankly, some of those haven't worked out, and in many instances, we haven't had any provision or way to try to remedy that. I'm going to jump down to Section 5 of the bill now, which is the calculation and application of an Inflex tax incentive. And again, in your handout here, I've got a little flow sheet here. We're lucky to have a graphic designer on staff who was able to put together this chart for you here with nice colors and everything. It's very easy to understand here. But I'm going to go through that as an explanation here. So for the incentive that MDA can offer on this, there will be base calculation. The base calculation in lines 546 through 570 is 1.5% of the total purchase or sales price of all manufacturing and processing machinery, 7% of the total purchase sales price for non-manufacturing equipment. Non-manufacturing equipment would be things like shelving, would be like computers, would be like just kind of inventory types of items. 2% of the total contract price or compensation can be paid to any contractor to construct a building or improve the real property. And then on the wage calculations, this is where I think this handout will be beneficial to you here. Because if you see in the base calculation, 15% of the average employer wage times the new full-time number of jobs will be available as a incentive to the employer if they are meeting or at 75% of the state or county wage. So this is kind of the bare bones part of this. This is the minimum amount, to apply this, but our hope is that we're going to attract people who go beyond this because our incentive is higher. So if you look below that, I've labeled one as plus scenario number 1. So if in addition to what we mentioned in the base calculation, the project is a new warehouse or distribution enterprise or new manufacturing facility that has 50 or more jobs and a $10 million plus investment, and the average employer wage is 110% of the state or county wage, and all-time full employees are offered health insurance coverage, and at least 50% of that is employer funded, then the business or industry will be eligible for an additional 30% of the average employer wage. I believe it's, I don't have the line number on that. Let me find one more thing here. Okay, and we'll go to plus scenario 2. If the project is not one of those kind of the major impact types of developments, but has 25 plus jobs, and the average employer wage is 125% of the state county wage, and the benefits are provided, then they're also eligible for that 30% additional amount of deduction there. And again, we'll go back through that a little bit more as we talk here. But that's in kind of summary here. In going through the 39 or so incentives that we have on tap, basically the calculations you see here, these are all in existing incentives that we are offering. So there's nothing in this that is a new incentive. This is just a combined mechanism to present this to make it easier to understand and to make it easier to calculate. And the encouragement here is if you are an employer and you're looking at this and you're deciding on whether or not to invest $9 million in the state or $10 million, and you see this, you may bump that up to $10 million. Or if you're deciding whether or not to pay your employees 75% of the county wage or pay them 110%, this incentive certainly could encourage a greater wage base to be paid as a result of what we're proposing here. So I'll keep moving along here. I know there'll be questions as we get through this, but moving to Section 6 of the bill. Section 6 of the bill basically says that it's the exclusive utilization of the Inflex incentive. This is put in there to just clear out or just make very clear that you cannot double dip on this, meaning that if you take the Inflex incentive, you can't then go out and get an Advantage Jobs or another one, as an additional incentive because you have opted for this instead. Section 7 is reporting to MDA. This is the transparency part of this, and that starts on about line 663. So if you remember last year, I had a transparency bill where I know Senator Blunt and I were very interested in this bill last session. I think Senator Norwood as well. But we tried to get that passed with some very firm and strong incentive requirements on it, and at the end of the day, it got watered down a little bit to get it through the process. I think what we have in this is what we proposed last year and will be the case on all of these incentives. So on this page of your handout now, the last one I believe you have, it has the annual report process and the things that are required. So the report shall include the total investment made through the end of the reporting year, the incremental investment during the reporting year, the total number of base jobs, so the jobs you had before you started this incentive, total number of new jobs at the end of the preceding year, the total number of new jobs at the end of the reporting year, the average wage for the reporting year, percentage and number of employees receiving benefits, a description of the benefits, the total Inflex incentive awarded total to date, and a listing of any affiliates or business associates that are as part of the agreement. In line 726, MDA shall prescribe a form for annual reporting. The hope of this is that it will be a simple form. That report will come to the House, to the Senate, it'll go to the governor. I think it'll be something that any and all of us can look at and decide if the business that expanded in our area is actually doing a good job. In lines 742 through 757, MDA gives a procedure to revoke an incentive for failure to file. If an Inflex recipient does not make the annual reportings, MDA can revoke their incentive for failure to comply with that. And then lines 758 through 802, MDA may adjust the award by issuance of an amended certification should the business fail to meet the performance measures. And so in this situation, say a business planned to hire 50 people, and for whatever reason they only had 46 at the end of the year, it doesn't require MDA to pull the whole project from them. It allows them to adjust the award and make provisions to continue that, but not give the full amount that had been promised, but to make kind of changes on the fly to encourage the business to continue those moves. In line 803, if the award is adjusted below the incentive amount already claimed, DOR may charge the business an assessment to recoup. So for example, if a business has taken $1 million worth of tax credits and we find that they have not met any of their obligations, and the amount that it shows that they owe is greater than the amount that they've actually been credited, DOR can do an assessment to recoup this. We have, as a state, tried to make provisions to make this happen before, but we've had to get the AG's office involved. I think this will make it very clear and transparent that the goal of the state is to make sure that the promises are actually being kept and that the business is doing what they intended to do when they made that movement. In line 816, it applies a 10-year expiration to the credit. Section 8 just gives the state auditor the ability to do audits. Section 9 gives MDA and DOR the sole authority to determine applicant qualification. Section 10, MDA and DOR shall promulgate rules and regulations for Inflex. And the rest of these I'm just going through real quick because they're more kind of cleanup things. But Section 11, the businesses which apply are approved for Inflex and are permitted to take tax credits. Section 12 provides that any employer required to deduct or withhold wages may apply for Inflex. Section 13 provides that the annual statement filed by an employer disclosing withholding for each employee shall reflect the gross amount withheld before the application for any Inflex tax credit. Section 14 deals with franchise tax for domestic corporations and says that a domestic business may apply for an Inflex tax credit against their franchise tax that is owed. Section 15 deals with franchise tax for foreign corporations and provides that a foreign business may apply an Inflex tax credit against a franchise tax owed. Section 16 just says that the Commissioner of Revenue's authority to promulgate rules and regulations is extended towards Inflex. Section 17 allows the Commissioner of Revenue the authority to collect the tax imposed. And Section 18 is a confidentiality section, and it just basically says that although a lot of this reporting is going to be done, there are certain confidential provisions of the deal that may not need to be made public, and it spells out the need to keep some of those deals confidential. And I know that was a very long explanation of the bill. Let me just say that this is something that has been worked on by economic developers. It has been vetted by MDA. It has been sent to the governor for review. It has been looked over by members of the House, by members of the Senate, by the Lieutenant Governor and the staff here. And I just appreciate all of their time and hard work. As you can tell by the length of the explanation, there are a lot of items that are touched by this. And I will be glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Parker, for the explanation. Are there any questions from the committee or any members that are on the Zoom call? Senator Younger, McDaniel, Barrett, and I'm not sure who the other person is. It's not a name, it's a number. Do any of y'all have questions that are Zooming online?
This is Senator Blackman. That's an unnamed person. How are you today?
Oh, hey, Senator, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Did I understand that it would, well, I think I understood this is $10 million or less. My question is, do we know how many businesses, if any, have been trying to come into the state and wanting to have tax incentives for under this threshold, and also whether we know whether there are businesses within the state would be expanding that would be able that have been wanting to utilize something like this.
I will say yes, kind of to both questions. On the first one, I think the main goal here, I think has been, I know it's been a big priority of the Lieutenant Governor in particular, is to kind of rebrand Mississippi and say that we are open for business. A number of the things we've been doing legislatively and, working through the COVID crisis, we are trying to, put a brand out there that makes a new business want to come here. My understanding of the Inflex proposal is that it will make it one of the easiest to understand incentives for an economic developer to just kind of portray to someone who's considering coming here. I liken it to this. I had one handout I was going to bring in here that had the applications for our current incentives that had hundreds of pages that had to be filled out to basically understand whether or not you might be able to be eligible for some of the incentives. This new process will make it easier for someone at the kind of the decision-making level of the company, say the CEO, who normally doesn't get into the legalese of the negotiations, to just look at this and say, okay, this is what I can get from coming here, and I think it'll put Mississippi at a competitive advantage against our neighboring states to attract new business. In answer to the second part of your question, I know of a few businesses. I know some in area where we are doing some workforce development training, I think in the Batesville area, that are considering or moving towards expansion right now, just based on some of the changes we've made in workforce development. And I think this is a piece that they would find very useful. And again, as we go back to the definitions of the different groups that can use it, I think Senator Blackman, in your area, in my area, in every area of the state, I think it will encourage economic development and new expansions.
Okay, Mississippi Development Authority, as our economic developer for the state of Mississippi, have they provided any kind of data of industries that have not met this threshold? And I mean, when we propose new legislation, we generally, as you well know, we have to get a fiscal note for any new legislation. So my question, have you, when in all of you all studies that you talked about, everybody who had looked at this, did you all say, if 10 businesses take advantage of this, this is what would happen? If 20 businesses take advantage of this, this is what would happen? If 100 businesses take advantage of this, this is what would happen? That's my question.
Okay, now,
and I'm all for the proposal,
right,
but I do like to see numbers. I'm a numbers person.
Right, and I do have, a few little specific scenarios, and I'll just kind of touch on this. Because what we're proposing here is not a new incentive, it's a retooling of existing incentives in a more transparent and easier to understand way. Any and every business here has had some opportunities to do incentives right now. This just makes it easier and a little bit clearer to them on how to do that. As far as the numbers and the actual data goes, what I have been explained in the things that I've been shown is that in some ways, by kind of combining this in this method, the actual dollar amount of the award that may go out to the company might be a little bit less in most situations than what it is now when they combine the multiple incentives they have on tap. But the ease of application and ease of reporting to the company, I think, is going to far outweigh any slight reduction in the incentive that they might receive on this. And so I think, Senator Blackman, that we don't have anything to compare because this is not in place. But I think with the reporting, within a short period of time, we would have that data to be able to show you, exactly what dollars and what numbers are being produced by this. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Parker.
Thank you, Senator Blackman. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Blunt, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Parker, I appreciate your work on this, and as you and I have discussed, my frustration for a long time with all of these incentive programs that we have is the state needs a way periodically to look at these programs and determine whether or not they're working in the state's interest or not, and there's really no way to do that right now. And so we've had a couple just come up earlier this year in this committee where a repealer is up, and the question is, well, has this been a net positive or net negative to the state? And we really have no way of answering that. So I'm hopeful that the accountability measures you've gotten here will allow us to do that and make those decisions. I do have some concerns with the very last subsection of the bill regarding the Public Records Act. I know one particular incentive that was in place until we repealed it a few years ago, for example, was the Cultural Retail Attraction Program. And so what I could do under current law is I could call the folks at MDA and I could say, I want a copy of the most recent filing for this incentive. I want to know the amount of the incentive that the company is eligible for and when that incentive expires. And I could get that information. I'm concerned with the specifics in the language beginning on line 1602 that I would no longer be able to get that on a similar project when it says any information, documentation, including without limitation, copies of any certifications, and I got the certification for the Cultural Retail Attraction Program, together with any amendments made thereto, yada, 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 shall be exempt from the Public Records Act. And so you've got a situation here, the way I read it, is that MDA has some information. They give it to the governor, they give it to the lieutenant governor and the speaker, they give it to IHL, and nobody else can have it. I think that's what that says. And so I think that might need a little bit more scrutiny. I mean, part of the problem, I know we discussed this when we had the cut and sew incentive a few weeks ago, is the number of companies receiving that was so small that to get the information that we needed, which require, you know who we were talking about. Right. And I understand that, and goodness knows everybody's taxes need to be private. But I ask you just to put some scrutiny on this because first, as much as possible, this stuff needs to be public information. And it just seems to me to be odd that MDA can have something and the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and IHL can have it, but I can't get it. And a member of the public can't get it. And so let's just look at that, because that transparency in making this stuff public is the heart of accountability. Right. And otherwise, the people who are making the awards and approving the contracts are in charge of what we see and what we don't see. So I think this is a step in the right direction, but anytime you start hiding information from the public and folks who give the awards just say, trust us, it makes me it just gets my antenna up. So I'm happy to see that.
I'll say I completely agree with you on that. And, that's one section of the bill that I've spent a good bit of time looking at, because what we're trying to balance, as you well know, is we're trying to balance, the desire to get the company here and to actually have them, feel comfortable that certain sensitive information is not going to be out in the public air. But we also want to have that reporting. So, I will be glad to continue to work with you on this. I know this is complicated. I am prepared, if we need to put a reverse repealer in it to move it along if necessary. But before we even get it to the floor, even if we don't put a reverse repealer in it, I can tell you that I'll be glad to meet with you and see if we can get some language there that you and I both feel comfortable with, because I think we're both trying to achieve the same result, but we're trying to do it in in an arena that we maybe don't have full understanding of. So I think pulling in maybe an economic developer or two in there to kind of say, okay, this is how and why certain information is important. It might be a good little sidebar discussion for us to have.
I agree, and I certainly I defer to your judgment on whether we need to make an amendment or not. I don't intend to offer one, but I just think this might need a little bit of refinement. So let's keep talking about it. Thank
I
you,
agree.
Mr. Chairman.
And in answer to the first part of your question about incentives, the next bill we're going to bring up after this has to do with repealing some of the incentives that we haven't been using. And my hope is with Inflex, if we find over time that we're using Inflex for more things, we may have some of these incentives that we've had in place for a while that we might just systematically get to pull back a little bit. And we're going to make a start towards that with the next bill today.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Blunt. Senator Horn, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I had another call I had to be on. Is there anything in this bill that speaks to changes in the film program?
In the film program? No, sir.
Is there anything that affects the tourism project section of the code?
Nothing in this bill.
Is there anything that speaks to healthcare, health industry incentives?
Well, Inflex will be available to any type of company or industry, so there's nothing in here that's pulling back or changing that. But, say you're a new healthcare, say you're a new pharmaceutical company and you want to relocate to Mississippi, they would be eligible to apply for Inflex. So what we've tried to do with this is make it be open to any and just about everybody looking to come to our state. So not directly, but indirectly, yes, sir.
And nothing, no changes on hotel projects?
None.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sparks, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make sure I understand. On line 440, we talked about an application to determine the benchmarks are already set, but MDA would have a role to review that a particular company had met those benchmarks. It's really not any subjectivity left in the application. It would be either you did or didn't meet your marks. Is that a fair assessment, Senator Parker?
I think that's a very fair assessment.
Okay, and then we talked about I think you said it's a 10-year program Inflex would be.
Right.
What do we do with, for instance, a business that came in last year, say into my district, it was a manufacturing business, and potentially they came in with some MDA credits being approved through this onerous application process. Do they convert mandatory to the new Inflex program, or is that a choice, or do they have that choice?
Existing incentives will not be affected by this. People who are working through an agreed upon deal, I think we'll probably have to honor that deal. But just like anything, I think if you had a company that desired to apply for it, I don't think there's anything in here that would disqualify them from making such an application. But to go through all of that after they've already worked through the sheer amount of paperwork they had to do in their first, I don't see that being the case very often. I haven't had many talks with economic developers about that, but I really see this as something that's going to be the process going forward and not the process looking back.
Okay, but if for some reason, and I have one particular business in mind, that if they looked at this program and said, for the next 9 years, we would be better served under the Inflex program, or maybe there's more benefits. Maybe they didn't qualify for, sometimes we've targeted the big businesses and not the mid-range. They could apply for this. Of course, we can't double dip, which by the application, if they were approved, would cut them out of the old stuff by their own choice. But that would be available to them to file.
Well, whether or not they file it or not, as an attorney, in looking at the process that they go through right now, it's such a laborious legal document that they have signed that I think they will be bound and kind of held by the provisions of the contract that they have now, unless, they have an agreed upon kind of scenario with MDA to release one and move to the other. And I haven't had that specific conversation with MDA. You know, if we can make it more attractive for business in the state, I think the goal is to try to do that. You know, but I think also, you know, if we start releasing an obligation that we already set forth for an existing company, we set kind of a dangerous precedent there, because at some point you have to release that one to award the other one, because you can't do both at the same time. And I'm just not sure about the legal possibilities of that, but I'll try to get you an answer for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Senator Sparks.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bryan.
I think the committee should think very carefully about the scenario Senator Sparks just outlined. As I understand what he's talking about, there is an industry which is currently operating. Whatever deals were made or weren't made or whatever, that industry is there and operating. And the question is, although not phrased this way, if they can pay fewer taxes by switching to this program, can they? Why would we want to do that? And this is my concern about the whole concept of incentive. Maybe you need to check the dictionary to see if it's got a new word. But by definition, if under the existing rules, the industry is there and operating, why would we want to, just as a gratuity, give them a tax cut? That's not an incentive, because they're already there and operating. I will say, looking at the definitions, I think this only applies to new industries, so I'm not sure that it permits any retroactive changes. But in all of the incentives from the word go, the dilemma has been, how do we determine whether we're doing something as an incentive which results in economic activity, as opposed to how much are we just giving somebody a tax break when the economic activity would occur anyway. And one concern about this, of course, is what happens to existing industry. And, you know, a couple years ago, the world went wild over a tire plant in Clinton and a tire plant in West Point. Well, Cooper Tire and Tupelo had been sitting there making tires all along. They weren't getting an incentive. Why are their competitors getting an incentive to come in and build tires when they're not? And the answer may well be, well, we're trying to increase employment, and this is new employment, and on, and that's the way the world works. But there are a lot of unintended consequences with this. But I wanted, Mr. Chairman, to make the point that if an industry is there and exists, and now they can shift to another program which gives them a tax break, that's not an incentive by definition. That's just a lagniappe.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Under the definitions of applicant on, I think, lines 84, it talks about seeking certification by the authority that such applicant is a qualified business or industry, and that its proposed new project or expansion of an existing business or industrial operation is qualified economic development project. So I hope that I understand your concern, and I think hopefully that addresses that this is a new project going forward, and it's not an existing business. So anyway, are there any other questions from the committee? Senator Fillingham, would you mind coming over the mic for the people that are, sorry, hit the button.
If a business were to relocate their corporate headquarters, is there any additional incentive for that in this bill, or is that already covered by existing statutes and they're not going to be messed with by this legislation?
So the headquarters relocation is one of those that is rolled into the Inflex. the way the headquarters relocation calculation was done was something that was figured in there by the economic developers. And we actually had, and I can get you a list of the existing incentives that are now ones that are kind of rolled into the Inflex incentive, and so that is one of the provisions within here. Although it's not listed, it gives them that type of incentive, but in a different manner.
Thank you. Senator Horn, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, one more question. When we had Yokohama to come here and Continental Tires and a lot of other companies, we give them all these incentives and these tax breaks and tax abatements, and then they up and go hire companies outside Mississippi to come into our state to do the work. Is there anything that speaks to that in the way of requirements to folks who accept our incentives?
There's nothing in this bill that makes that type of requirement. Although I do share your desire that I want to see, as I've expressed many times on the floor, I want to see Mississippi dollars stay in Mississippi, whether those are construction dollars or healthcare dollars, whatever type of dollars they are. In this scenario, though, I don't know that that there's a way to put that provision in here and apply that to this, and to, as a result, leave the other ones, because what we're trying to do is encourage business and industry to use this incentive. And so in kind of laying that out in Inflex, we might kind of push people away from wanting to take advantage of Inflex and push them back to one of the other provisions. But I do share your concern.
Well, could we have staff to look at what some other states might be doing in this regard?
Be glad to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Horn. Any further questions from the committee? Anybody viewing online have a question? Senator Thomas, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked about existing businesses that wanted to make an expansion. Was it an amount of expansion? Could you elaborate a little? So if we had an existing business, and
if we go back, to do an expansion, the minimum qualifier for Inflex is $2.5 million. There are some other expansions. We mentioned if it's a new manufacturing or something of that, then that level goes up to 10 million. But we spend a lot of time thinking about what the threshold should be, for Inflex. At one time we thought we should lower it down to 1 million, but we felt that would maybe be giving too many incentives out, and and that might kind of clog up the true intent of this. And we kind of settled at 2.5 million as a minimum investment, because we felt a company making that type of investment was making a significant investment into the state. So if you have a company in your area that wants to make a $2.5 million expansion, they would be eligible to apply for this.
even if they had an existing program, could they then switch, apply for this program?
So say, for example, and again, this is my understanding, say their existing program that they're working through now, or maybe they finished, required them to have 50 new jobs. If they have a new agreement that says they're going to have an additional 25 jobs and an additional expansion that's going to put more people to work, I think they could apply. MDA is going to have the sole authority to award that, and so, there will be some talks and discussions on that, but that is the intent, is to encourage expansion, because in reality, I've had a number of talks with MDA. We had a great economic development year last year, even though we went through COVID. We had many companies in the state actually expand. We had very few relocations into the state, but we do a good job of building from within, and the goal of this is to try to encourage expansion as much as encouraging, new companies to relocate here.
Senator Parker, just one final question. In terms of marketing, how do we plan to market this program to get it to the level for the businesses in my community or any community will be able to access it or know what's going on?
If we get the pieces in place, you know, my hope is we wanted to set up the Office of Workforce Development. We want to set up Inflex. We want to rebrand Mississippi. I also want to see some incentives for smaller businesses that don't apply in Inflex. I've even considered, and I'll throw this concept out here, like a mini Inflex for smaller businesses. That would be a discussion for perhaps next year. You know, but I think it's all a part of a big picture, and I think that branding is something that I know the Lieutenant Governor has felt strongly about. With some of the changes we've made in the state, I think it's the perfect time to do that. And I expect to be bringing marketing and other things like that at some point during the next couple of years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator England, question.
Yes, I just wanted to clear up something that I think that goes along the lines of what Senator Horn asked. I know there's been some projects and different companies that in the past we've had issues with, but the incentive that we're providing here does include a provision that so many new jobs will be created. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and those would be Mississippi jobs that are being created, right?
In most instances, I mean, you may have, you know, something where, you know, say in my area, you might have a new distribution center go in, and some of the people might be crossing the state line, but, you know, in general, almost all of the jobs would be Mississippi jobs.
Right, and most of our definitions, including like the definition of average state or county wage, we use Mississippi-specific language there. Is that correct?
We do, and I didn't go into that, but when we do county and state and county wage, for example, if we do have a, you know, business that's going to be within or kind of servicing two counties, you know, we'll take the average wage from one county and the other, and we'll get kind of an average of the averages, and that'll be kind of the base for the 75% or the 110 or the 125 to encourage the higher thresholds of pay.
Right, and do I understand correctly where this is different and where this is performance-based is if those jobs aren't created, then the credits get rolled back later on. So this does address some of the concerns that we have with companies coming in the past and not meeting their promises. Is that right?
That's one of the main intents of this.
Okay.
You know, is to, you know, make sure that we have the ability to award an incentive, but also be able to monitor the incentive and also to adjust the incentive or remove the incentive, you know, if the terms of the conditions are not being met.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Parker. And I'll say that I've had discussions with my economic development folks and other people, site developers and people who've looked at sites. And I think initially this was kind of a, you know, an unknown, something they were scared of. But with the negotiations that have taken place with you and with the Lieutenant Governor's office and with other entities in the state, I think we've got a really good piece of legislation here that's been worked on and that's going to help Mississippi, like you say, let everybody know we're open for business here and to try to get folks to move here. I'm proud to support this. So thanks for answering my questions for me.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator England. Are there any other questions from the committee? All right.
Move title sufficient, do pass.
Motion is title sufficient to pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. That bill will be
We've got one
reported
more.
out. Next bill is Senate Bill number 2967. Senator Parker, I recognize you to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have started alluding a little bit to this bill during our previous discussion of Inflex. But in going through this, what we have kind of determined is that, you know, in addition to kind of revamping and doing Inflex, we have some incentives out there that have not been used that need some adjustment either in how we use them or in repealing them. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the first two sections first, which are ones we are adjusting, explain that, and then I'm going to go through the ones that we are talking about repealing or modifying as a result of this second bill here. But this is the tax credit amendment repeal companion to Inflex. And if you go to section 1, the employer provided dependent care tax credit. This is something we are proposing to increase or to change in a positive manner. So this particular credit is a tax credit to an employer for the expenses of providing certified daycare to employees. A credit is applied to the net cost of any contract executed by the employer for another entity to provide dependent care. Or if the employer elects to provide dependent care itself, it can be used for expenses of the dependent care. So a company could elect to have a daycare facility within their office or within their business to take care of the needs of the kids on the site. So this is existing. We've had this in statute. The amount of that credit, if you go to line 49, this change would raise the amount of that tax credit from 50% of the cost to 75% of the cost. And the reason for this is that although this credit is currently in place, it's not being used very frequently. And we just kind of feel that child care is an important unresolved issue in the state for many working adults, particularly single mothers or fathers. And increasing the credit is designed to make this more enticing to probably, try to bring more of these people back into the workforce if they are struggling to be there. And then there's some cleanup language in lines 87 and 89 that don't affect the provisions. Section 2 of the bill deals with the Mississippi Business Finance Corporation Revenue Bond Debt Service Rural Economic Development, or the RED tax credit. So an explanation of the credit is the debt service incurred by any eligible business under the Mississippi Rural Economic Development Assistance Program, which uses the revenue bond, can be taken as a credit on the Mississippi income tax return. This was created to finance economic development projects, and to accomplish this, the MBFC issues bonds, and then the tax credit is equal to the amount paid to service the debt. This income tax credit is also known as the RED credit, or the Mississippi Business Finance Corporation Revenue Bond Service Credit. Under current law, and this is one of the provisions we've found in this, the language in current law allows the credit to be applied to both principal and interest, which seems to be an excess or a windfall to the business. And I'll give you the personal example. When I buy business equipment, I might buy a $100,000 piece of, equipment, and I'm allowed to deduct that piece of equipment the year that I do it as a 179 deduction. The year after that, if I have a note on that, I'm allowed to deduct the interest on that, but I'm not allowed to deduct the principal, because in theory, I've already realized the advantage of taking the principal deduction at the time that I got the initial kind of award. And so in speaking with Lieutenant Governor's staff and other people involved in this, what we want to do on this is in lines 168 through 193, we want to mirror the tax credit language in other statutes such that it will replace the word debt service with the word interest expense in lines 181 and 185. And again, I think this gets back to kind of a transparency issue, and I think this is something that we may get a little bit of pushback against, because there are probably, some people who have been benefiting from this, but I do think it's kind of a loophole we've determined in looking through all these incentives that could be a challenge and certainly needs some attention. In Section 3, we're going to move into the incentives that are being more repealed. Section 3 deals with the clean energy business enterprise tax exemption. This is a sales and income tax exemption available for a 10-year period to certain clean energy business enterprises that locate or expand to Mississippi. This exemption is currently not used. It was a standalone exemption that was put in place for a business we were trying to attract here, and this credit is actually going to be provided in a different form through Inflex. And so as a standalone credit, it just doesn't seem to be one that we need to keep on the books because Inflex can cover that. If Inflex does not move forward, or if Inflex gets challenged, the reason I call this a companion bill is some of these bills and these proposals we're making here, if Inflex does not move into place, we certainly don't want to repeal things that are going to be replaced by Inflex if Inflex does not exist. So in moving down the lines in this section, lines 465 to 476 are kind of cleaning up a definition. 479 is deleting references. 483, 484 is repealing exemptions. 498, 499 is repealing exemptions. I have had some discussions, had a phone call right before this meeting on lines 656 through 663. There are some words in there that have to do with the Public Service Commission and broadband technologies. My initial thought on that is that we may want to take these out, and when we get to the end here, I would certainly welcome an amendment to strike lines 656 through 663 at the appropriate time when we reach that moment. Section 4 is more red bond cleanup to adjusting the clean air business enterprise. Section 5 is the research and development tax credit. What we're doing here is repealing this. This is a tax credit equal to this certain percentage of payroll deduction for positions requiring research and development skills. It has had almost no utilization since inception, and this kind of credit is already provided through Inflex. And as we mentioned earlier, if there is an entity out there who's receiving this credit, this is not going to change their existing deal. This is just not going to make this be a deal that's available going forward. Section 6 repeals code sections related to the clean energy project referenced above. Section 7 deletes reference to the research and development code. Section 8 deletes code sections related to the clean air project that's never been used. Section 9 deletes reference to the clean air project. Section 10 deletes provisions related to revenue collected under the Advantage Jobs Act. Again, this is just clarifying language here. Section 11 deletes provisions exempting clean air business from franchise tax levy. Section 12 deletes provisions exempting clean air business from the franchise tax levy for foreign businesses. Section 13 deletes another part of that to kind of clean up some of the language. And then sections 14 through 23 are code sections that the attorneys continue to try to find exemptions and scenarios where we're not leaving provisions in place that touch additional code sections. So on this one, I do want to add a reverse repealer because I want it to be clear to everyone that there is no desire, to Senator Horn's question earlier, we are not through this bill looking to do anything to any of the, and there are some code sections that are here for port facilities in Section 15. There are code sections here for airports in Section 16. In 17 has to do with energy facilities, job training. And Section 21 mentions the word tourism. Section 22 mentions tourism sales tax. And Section 23 mentions tourism again. Again, the intent here is not to touch those sections or delete them, but to make sure that we don't have provisions that are overlapping here that need some adjustment in the process. So that's a brief explanation. Again, I will have an amendment, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time to remove the lines that we mentioned and to add a reverse repealer to the bill. The chairman is asking that because of staffing issues, that because we have to bring this up in the next committee meeting, he's asking that we make this amendment on the floor instead of in the committee process. It is my complete and total guarantee to you that I will make that amendment on the floor, and you can hold me to that. But to just let you know, we will put a reverse repealer in it, and I will address those sections in the floor process, which we anticipate being a very soon event, if things move the way I'm hoping. So,
Thank
questions?
you, Senator. Senator Bryan, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I keep trying to find a microphone so I can take this thing off and perhaps be heard without risking everybody's health. I think the amendment has two parts to it.
Yes, sir.
Am I recognized to speak on both of those parts? The Lord has led me to speak on both of those. But as regards the effective date, my understanding is this is, in a sense, a companion bill to 2822. In other words, if 2822 does not pass, this bill.
Pass.
Okay. Well, I would just suggest to make that clear, if you're going to change the effective date, you could say it's effective July 1st or upon passage of 2822, if you want to. There's a way to do that with the effective date.
Right.
But you're going to do a floor amendment anyway, so.
Correct.
I just-
I'll get with council, I'll get with staff about the best way to do that. You may be able to help me with that more. I don't remember in the short 9 years I've been here, any time where we have codified something with a provision that something else also be codified at the time. Have we, I think we can find that, and you may be the expert on how to make that happen, but we will certainly look into that, Senator.
Well, if you want to do that, you can. It's not a big deal with me. I was just going to think that might make your intention clearer as the bill went through the process, but it is not. The matters concerning broadband, are these private companies that are getting these incentives? I assume they are.
I would say, in answer to your question, the answer is yes. And again, that section is a little bit beyond my firm understanding at this time. And so between now and the floor, I'm going to try to look into that more. I think, you know, the statement I made, I'm going to stand by, that I'm going to repeal those. But I hope by the time we get on the floor to have a better understanding of why we're getting phone calls and texts and messages about that, you know, during the meeting and that kind of thing, as I think a number of us are getting.
Are these text messages and phone calls coming from your constituents and people out in the state that are worried about it, or are they coming from private companies who want to get the tax credit?
More the broadband technology industry in general would be my...
This is my concern about that. Trying to get private for-profit companies to provide broadband in underserved areas is like trying to put toothpaste back into a toothpaste tube, whatever. They're trying to make money for their shareholders, which is fine. But don't mistake that for anything other than a company trying to make money. They do not care. They do not care. They do not care if people out in the sticks ever get broadband unless they can make money. And taking money out of the state treasury and giving to them so that they can finagle their business plan and qualify for it is just a completely inefficient way to do something. The people that are actually getting broadband out into the rural areas are the nonprofits set up by the electric power companies who, in fact, do care about getting broadband out into the sticks, and they're doing it. And I think if we've got any money at all, that's where we need to put it, and put it in some sort of entity that's actually got that as its goal. We no longer have the universal service requirement, so what has happened is the industry as a whole has rid itself of the universal service requirement, which is to say it's rid itself of any obligation or legal requirement to provide telephones, broadband, anything else to people out in the sticks. You can't even get, as they call it now, a landline, which is to say you really can't get a telephone anymore. And so all the revenue that was built into the system, which formerly had gone to underwrite the less affluent service, has now been sucked away and delivered to the big boys and the shareholders and the profits and dividends and all. And they all brag about the free enterprise system, except there are folks out here that ain't got no broadband. So.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Are there any other questions on the bill? Seeing none.
Move title sufficient to pass.
Motion is title sufficient to pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion to rise and report.
Rise and report, and we are going to reconvene for economic development immediately.
All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Rise and report.